In those images appears a 16-year-old girl, a 16-year-old teenager who is now detained as a suspect of having committed the crime. What was next to the body? A wire? From the data that emerged from the autopsy, she was attacked with a sharp object and apparently suffocated with that bloody wire that appeared close to the body.
What a young girl, a 16-year-old, did out of jealousy and envy is truly incredible and disappointing. It turns out that Karen Yanez is obsessed with Maria Fernanda's life to such a degree that she does everything possible to look like her, even being capable of getting into a dispute over a boy's attention. Unfortunately, her madness took her much further than simple differences between young people. Karen acted in a premeditated way and did something unimaginable. Although such a crime was carried out in a sadistic and premeditated manner, the proceedings of the Argentine law put a strong feeling of shock and helplessness on the population due to the mild consequences of Karen's actions. The reason? Well, because she was, can you imagine? As usual, she was a minor at the time of committing this atrocity. But before we continue, let me tell you about the life of Maria Fernanda Chicco, who was an 18-year-old girl born in a small town called Ceres in Argentina. Her parents, Silvia Linardos and Javier Chicco, were very proud of the woman she was becoming. She was charismatic, cheerful, helpful, and thus loved by her family and friends. That's why, when this tragedy occurred, the boys had the support of a lot of people.
Yes, the truth is yes. First of all, because my daughter was very loved. Imagine that at 18 years old, she had countless friends. She was a healthy girl. And, well, after this happened, we had the support of the entire community in the area from neighboring towns. Even the idea of gathering signatures to ask for changes in laws and everything came from the people themselves to demand justice.
He earned all this affection throughout his life. From a young age, Maria Fernanda demonstrated a sociable personality. She liked to participate in activities, being a member of the Scouts and even in theater plays. She was always outgoing, a girl capable of making friends wherever she went. Thus, as she grew up, so did her close circle. That's why, shortly before finishing high school, in addition to her classmates, she had met many more people. Among them was a 23-year-old young man named Rodrigo Gomez, with whom, despite the age difference, she did not hesitate and started a romantic relationship. Because Maria Fernanda was a very responsible young woman and close to her parents, she received all the support from Silvia and Javier. Regarding this new bond, there was a 5-year difference. However, the first impression that Rodrigo gave was too good. Everything seemed to indicate that he was a trustworthy person who had great affection for Fernanda and who strived to win the affection of his girlfriend's parents. So the welcome to the family didn't take long to arrive. However, as time went by, certain attitudes of the individual were revealed which painted him as a manipulative and opportunistic person. Even the rumor arose that in addition to Fernanda, there was another young girl who also called herself his girlfriend. It was then that the parents decided to intervene and dissuade their daughter from continuing with that destructive relationship. Being the year 2014, shortly after high school graduation, and although it was not what she wanted, Fernanda agreed knowing it was the best for her. In addition, her plans did not consist of staying in the town of Ceres but moving to Cordoba to continue her studies. And as I tell you, for some time, she had her professional future very clear. She wanted to study film and television, for which she prepared, hoping to start her classes at the University of the 21st Century. Is this a new beginning? What excited the young woman the most was that she would be accompanied by her best friend, Lina, with whom she had shared experiences since childhood. The girls moved full of dreams and illusions, and before they knew it, a whole year had passed. University was going great with new friends, professional goals, and significant effort towards excelling in classes. However, considering how attached Maria Fernanda was to her parents, she never missed an opportunity to return to her hometown and visit her family, friends, and other loved ones, who always welcomed her with open arms. Then by February 15, 2015, with the intention of spending carnivals at home, Alina and Fernanda packed their bags and traveled back to Ceres. It was supposed to be a great weekend, socializing with friends, celebrations, and a well-deserved rest. Before returning to the life of a student and independent girl, the girl, as I was telling you, 18 years old, arrived very excited to give her parents a hug. But she had no idea that in a matter of time, her name and face would occupy the front pages of the news, recounting her heartbreaking end.
María Fernanda Chicco was found murdered, this film and television student who lived as a girl in the town of Ceres, who had gone to study in the city of Cordoba, and who, for the long weekend, the past weekend, traveled the previous Sunday. She said she was going to meet a friend afternoon, but in reality she went to an appointment with who she thought was this young man who she was still in love with. But what happened? The accused, the 16-year-old detainee, had stolen her boyfriend's cell phone, and from that phone she summoned María Fernanda. So María Fernanda was deceived into going to that place thinking she was going to meet the young man.
However, an old, unrequited love and a fairly unhealthy rivalry were the main reasons why María Fernanda found herself face to face with the person who was going to take her life. And it was during that same Sunday, February 15th, when apparently Rodrigo Gomez sent her a text message. They chatted a bit and then he proposed to meet somewhere in the town. The young woman, who still had feelings for him, couldn't help but agree to the meeting, which would take place after noon. And once the plan was made, María Fernanda decided it wasn't a good idea to share with her parents her meeting with the young man whom they no longer appreciated. Therefore, she told them a lie. "I'm going to meet a friend," was what she confessed, those being the last words that Sylvia and Javier would hear from their daughter. Minutes later, Miss Chicco took her bicycle and set off towards where she was supposedly going to meet Rodrigo. Hours later, there was no news of María Fernanda. Her parents became worried when they saw that she was not returning home and tried to contact her by phone, but without success. The lack of communication quickly turned to anguish, raising the question, why wasn't she answering? Or why wasn't she responding to messages and calls, was what they desperately wondered. Then Mrs. Sylvia and Mr. Javier went out to look for their daughter. They knocked on the doors of their daughter's friends, but no one had any information about her whereabouts. Without wasting any more time, the couple went to the police station to report the disappearance. The response was immediate, not only from the police officers, but also from a large part of the town's inhabitants, who, without hesitation, joined in the search, hoping to find the woman as soon as possible. The hope of seeing her alive again remained latent. Her family in particular did not give up, nor did they let themselves be carried away by pessimism. However, unfortunately, María Fernanda had already been dead for a few hours by the time they found the body. On the morning of February 17th at around 8:30, some workers from a timber trading company called El Bagual reported a rather disturbing discovery. It was the red-soaked body of a woman which lay beneath a bicycle. And well, you can imagine, it was Fernanda, whose body was wearing the same clothes she was last seen alive in. And at first glance, the cause of her death could be observed, as around her neck there were marks made by a barbed wire. The same one they found just a few centimeters from there. It measured approximately 20 centimeters and was covered with stains very similar to blood. In addition to this, a bladed weapon was found with which it appears the victim's body was stabbed, causing 2 more wounds.
That he would have attacked her with a knife and strangled her with a wire found at the crime scene. The knife, scissors, and gloves, as described by the mother over the phone on Friday, were taken and she attempted to conceal it all. But the second piece of evidence that implicates this 16-year-old girl is that María Fernanda's cell phone was found at her house.
Obviously, the discovery of the body was devastating for the kids. At first, they had no idea who could have done such a horrendous act. However, as the investigation progressed, dozens of surprising facts began to emerge, piecing together the puzzle of the case. One of them was the fact that María Fernanda, contrary to what her parents knew, was still in contact with her ex-boyfriend Rodrigo, even seeing each other sporadically when there was an opportunity. Naturally, once this information was discovered, the main suspect became the ex-boyfriend who was arrested and interrogated that same day. The truth was that he had nothing to do with the matter. which he was able to prove without any further problem. The compelling evidence of his innocence came when images were discovered from the security cameras located around the crime scene. In them, Rodrigo did not appear, but another young girl, a 16-year-old girl named Karen Ñañez. Since then, the investigations began to take a chilling turn, as all the evidence pointed to her as the responsible party. Interestingly, the perception that was had of her was far from that of a cold-blooded bully. In fact, some people described her as a pleasant, studious, and cheerful young girl. And although it was only a matter of time before other characteristics of her personality began to emerge, the first thing to arouse suspicion was that, apparently, Karen had or was having a relationship with Rodrigo. Then, the video showed something absolutely unprecedented, eliminating any doubt that could be had about her responsibility for the events. When María Fernanda arrived at the meeting point, she realized that her ex-partner was nowhere to be found. Instead, she saw the girl with whom she had certain differences. Subsequently, both appeared struggling until the attacker took the victim to a blind spot where the security cameras no longer captured the crime. However, minutes later, you can again see the 16-year-old girl dragging the body of Miss Chicco. Well, you can imagine her. She wanted to hide the evidence among the piles of wood that were scattered around the area. His arrest followed swiftly after the evidence surfaced. Also, the peaceful state in which the police found her drew much attention. She didn't seem like a disturbed young woman. She showed no remorse, nor was there a hint of regret in her being. In fact, she seemed extremely calm, enjoying a gathering with friends as if nothing had happened.
The girl, who was at a birthday party and denied involvement in the crime, was arrested and taken to the police station. At the police station, a crowd of 500-800 people, depending on sources, gathered and caused damage, nearly resulting in a riot. Because the detainee was already inside and they wanted the police to hand her over.
While the motive for the crime leaned towards the jealousy that this girl may have had towards María Fernanda, new information began to emerge as the investigations progressed. For example, it was discovered the obsession that Karen had been showing for a long time. It was not a simple feeling of teenage envy. The history between both already portrayed a certain rivalry at a quite worrying level. There were even moments of aggression between them, with Karen being the instigator. Firstly, who allegedly on one occasion wanted to ram who she considered her rival with a motorcycle. And as if that were not enough, through social networks it could also be noticed the great effort that Karen put into physically resembling María Fernanda, imitating her in her way of dressing, styling her hair, and posing. In the photographs,
the parents reported that the alleged murderer had short hair and put on extensions to resemble María Fernanda. The physical similarity is astonishing. For legal reasons, we cannot show the face of this girl under investigation.
To say that everything had been dealt with and an accident was not a possibility. The truth was that the teenager had everything against her, as within a matter of days an irrefutable sense of premeditation could be attributed to the case. This was because the accused had posted an image of the crime scene on her social media, the same one she accompanied with the words, "You just finished." Obviously, it was a threat or a structured plan. And besides, it was impossible not to relate this act to what happened afterwards, a crime triggered by an out-of-control rivalry, probably stemming from wanting Rodrigo's attention, as despite being María Fernanda's ex-boyfriend, they continued to keep in touch and have occasional meetings. A situation that Karen could not tolerate, consuming her to the point of losing her mind and becoming a murderer. Now, analyzing the girls' posts, they are somewhat chilling considering the sinister resemblance between them, same hairstyle, same makeup, same poses, and even photo editing. Interestingly, although Karen claimed to be the official girlfriend of the subject in question, he contradicted her under the argument that by then there was nothing between them, except the resentment of a breakup that the teenager did not want to accept. Each with their versions of things, which unfortunately, the one who paid the consequences was María Fernanda. The reasons were beside the point, and the fact was summed up to a premeditated murder from which it would be extremely difficult to obtain exemplary justice. Since Karen was a minor, she had some laws in her favor, protecting her even more than the victim herself. However, in one way or another, the three young people were in a kind of love triangle. Because if not, the accused would not have been able to obtain Rodrigo's phone to impersonate him and then summon her target, that is, Fernanda. According to the reconstruction of events, once the meeting was agreed upon and the encounter took place, Karen was fully prepared to do what she had planned. She carried with her a pair of scissors and a knife, as well as a barbed wire with which she grabbed her by the neck. The first attack with the stabbing weapon was towards the back. From that moment, he was able to subdue her and achieve his goal, all out of sight of the security cameras. Then when she felt satisfied taking his life, Karen cut a lock of hair from her victim. She took her sandals and left from there, leaving the body under the bicycle that the victim had used for transportation. And although at first she declared herself innocent and even denied having seen María Fernanda, when Mrs. Sylvia asked her if she knew anything about her whereabouts, it was only a matter of time before the evidence of what this girl had done fell before her eyes. The entire town of Ceres, Santa Fe, expressed their disgust. She earned the hatred of the people, and if it weren't for the authorities, she might have suffered physical violence as part of a revenge for her actions.
The people's demands were incomprehensible. In other words, what they intended was for us to hand over the person we had detained in relation to that case so that they could see them, so that they could insult them, and well, that undoubtedly is something inexplicable, that people ask you for that. I mean, they have to understand that we, when arresting a person, also have to provide them with the rights that, as such, the law provides for these types of situations. And that is precisely what was done.
Karen admitted to being the mastermind behind the crime. However, she refused to officially testify. Then, exercising one of the rights mentioned by the officer, she was provided with psychological care to determine the cause of her actions. And although she was allegedly diagnosed with some psychological disorders, the specialist did not comment exactly what disorder or what mental complication she suffered from. Meanwhile, the court gave a period of 10 days to determine her future. On one hand, some socio-educational measures were considered, hoping that through these, Karen could successfully carry out her social reintegration. But the severity of her actions warranted much more than that. In particular, the Chicco family did not want the premeditation of the murder to be overlooked. So the lawyer hoped to be able to get the defendant tried once she turned 18. Thus, with the possibility that Karen might not receive the punishment she deserved, the streets of Ceres, Santa Fe were filled with protesters who wanted, besides demanding justice, they wanted the judicial system to review the laws that protect minors who commit such atrocious crimes, because the feeling of impunity that this case left shook Argentina to its core. Unfortunately, Karen would run. So lucky that for the December holidays of that same year, she was allowed to enjoy the celebration at home with her family in the city of Rosario. This being the first time of many, as to the displeasure of the affected family, it was a program of the juvenile judicial process. Less than a year after the crime, the perpetrator began to enjoy total freedom, living under her mother's roof. In the city of Rosario, she was still enjoying. In fact, to give you an idea of the mockery of a minor's rights, responding to authorities with just one psychological evaluation per week. Clearly, these actions by the authorities put public opinion under one of the greatest discontents in the criminal history of Argentina. No one could believe the way they were handling the case. Karen was a dangerous young woman, a murderer. However, it seemed like her well-being mattered more than bringing justice to the memory of her victim. As if María Fernanda had been written off and they were giving another chance at life to her killer. And so, as time went on, the fear also grew that once she reached the age of majority, it would be agreed that she could not be tried as an adult. Arguing her scant 16 at the time of committing the crime, the shock and the feeling of impunity were palpable. People did not forget, did not forgive, and much less let Karen live in peace. Mrs. Sylvia and her husband Javier, on the other hand, as well as lawyer Hugo Parma, made it clear that despite the time, they would continue to fight for a fair trial. completely disapproving of the overly lenient judicial system that protects minors whose crimes should be judged as adults.
I believe that we must set aside that prejudice that minors cannot be stigmatized or criminalized, because society expects a response. And this society is that while the person is a minor, they are interned, specifically deprived of their freedom, and then the corresponding sanction is applied. But not that the province looks the other way, and we now find that in Rafaela, there would not be a suitable establishment for aggressive female minors.
Unfortunately, at that time, nothing could be done except to fight for the case to remain open, and once the age of majority was reached, the possibility of an exemplary sentence was opened. Shortly after, this was established and parents only had to let the months go by, surely living with a knot in their stomach, in their throat, watching as the person responsible for taking their daughter's life enjoyed a completely normal life. However, since the now deceased had dozens of friends who esteemed her, it wasn't long before one of them spoke up. It was Alina, the same girl with whom she lived in Cordoba, the one I was telling you about earlier. She took the time to make a page dedicated to María Fernanda, where pictures of her were posted, with the purpose of keeping the case relevant. However, what caught the most attention was that soon pictures of Karen herself began to appear, showing her lifestyle, her smile, and her carefreeness. This action sparked the fury of the people who in one way or another began to take justice into their own hands, judging every step of the young woman, commenting on her social networks and stalking her wherever she went. That no one can look at you without hate, that's what the post said, which later served as a hook to collect other testimonies from other girls whose stories were also related to Karen and her violence. Apparently, this young girl would seek out her ex-boyfriend's partners and then threaten them, according to the pattern detected in each story. And by the year 2016, Karen appeared on the student list of the School of Medicine in Rosario. As expected, it was only a few days before her face was captured by one of her classmates who knew about the girl's case. And he did not hesitate to make her stay at the educational institution public. It was not surprising that she received the hatred of the rest in the student community. And so it happened in all other areas of her life, being identified, pointed out, repudiated, and then excluded from wherever she was. While justice owed a lot to Chicco's family, society, as you realize, was in charge of making Karen's life impossible. In a way, however you want to see it, to do justice. Until finally, in the year 2019, a new hope appeared in the life of Fer's parents, as, by the way, they affectionately called her and remembered her. The perpetrator was declared by a judge to be criminally responsible for the aggravated homicide of María Fernanda, the same crime for which the sentence amounted to life imprisonment. And it wasn't until July of the year 2020 that Karen received her sentence of just 7 years in prison with effective fulfillment. Then, due to an appeal, another 6 years were added to the sentence. However, nothing seemed certain, as suddenly the possibility arose that instead of serving prison, she would be punished with community service related to her medical studies. Despite the years, everything indicated that Fernanda's memory would never obtain justice, so her parents continued the fight until the year 2022. A new sentence of 13 years opened the possibility of at least her spending some time in jail. Unfortunately, the weak judicial system could not manage to carry out the arrest. So far, Karen continues trying to live her normal life, being watched by the entire community, discovering her every time she changes her hairstyle or changes her name or pretends to be someone else. Meanwhile, the struggle for Sylvia and Javier remains latent, and the memory of their daughter is what gives them the most strength to continue waiting. Someday this murderer will step into the cell where she should have been for almost a decade. Don't forget about the main channel, Many More Mysteries, where videos are posted on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays.